Earlier this week, Donald Trump was fined for repeatedly violating a gag order in his hush money criminal trial, and Trump was threatened with jail time if he continues to violate the order. With more on this, we welcome former U.S. Attorney Paul Charlton, now a partner at Dentons. Paul, always a pleasure. Good to have you here. Held in contempt for violating this gag order on what? Social media posts? What was this all about?
Mostly Truth Social, speaking sometimes in front of the press immediately after the hearings or during breaks during the trial. Earlier this week, as you know, Ted, there were 9 findings of contempt. Each fine has a maximum amount. The maximum amount, this is something the judge is struggling with, of $1,000. So a $9,000 fine imposed on Monday. Now, for you and I, that would be a significant number. If you're a billionaire, it's not quite so significant. So the judge is struggling with a number of different issues, including how do I make an impact when fine is the maximum amount I can get to $1,000? And the only other step I have available to me is incarceration.
Well, if that's the only other step, wouldn't you bump up the fine a little? $1,000, that's lunch for this guy.
Right. But the statute won't allow the judge to go any higher than $1,000 per offense. Today, the same judge heard that the prosecution believes there were 4 additional violations, and again is struggling with the idea which one of them are true violations, and what do I do with an individual who may be continuing to ignore my orders.
He said, I've never heard this word before, incarceratory. Incarceratory punishment might be necessary. I think we understand what he's saying there, but is he going to go that far?
That's a difficult question to answer, because if you think about just the mechanics of what it means to incarcerate a former president who has a security detail, where can you truly do that with Secret Service agents who have to watch for the protection and the safety of all former presidents? How does that happen? If you're running for president, as this individual is, in an election, and you're the leading candidate for one of the parties, how do you keep that individual away from the election? How do you stop that? All of these are very difficult questions, and you can see the judge's reluctance to move that far.
Trump is saying that he's simply defending himself on social media, and he says it's unconstitutional, that this gag order is unconstitutionally limiting his free speech. Does he have a point?
That issue, or whether or not gag orders limit an individual's free speech, has been litigated many times. The idea of a gag order isn't new. It happens throughout the country in state and federal courts every day. What's different is this former president is running for president of the United States, and so it makes the argument, I need to be able to stand up in front of the people and make statements to argue why it is I should be the next president, more difficult for this judge now. The president is also saying when someone like Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, says something unkind about him, why can't I, as the former president, say something in return? So the judge heard a little bit of that argument today. It seemed to gain a little bit of traction, but there was another argument that the prosecution made saying he's also talking about the jurors in a pejorative way, and that ought not to occur. So the judge seemed to take that one to heart a little bit more. And if past his prologue, Ted, it's going to be a few days before we hear from the judge on this issue.
And again, no public statements on witnesses or jurors, but it's okay to criticize the judge, and it's okay to criticize the DA. Does that make sense to you?
It doesn't. Well, here's why it doesn't make sense. Because common sense teaches us that even people like judges have the ability to listen to and can hear criticisms of the way it is they're conducting themselves. And for even their very best efforts, the best of us who hear criticism of the way we're doing our job are going to find it difficult to be fair and impartial. So for most criminal defendants, it is unwise to criticize the individual who's going to be controlling literally your guilt or innocence and whether or not your liberty is taken away in the event of a guilty verdict. So that part, the strategy behind this, doesn't make sense to me.
Well, could it make sense if, though, you think that you could use this on appeal, that it's obvious he was against me, I was saying all these things against him, and he didn't respond, or he threatened to put me in incarceratory, made up a new word as far as I was concerned. But I mean, can you not say to a judge down the road, can't you see he was biased because he didn't like what I was saying about him?
A couple of thoughts. You'd have to first show bias or prejudice, and this judge has really done a yeoman's job of making sure that he runs this courtroom well and doesn't show prejudice or bias. And the people to whom you are appealing are judges themselves.
Yeah.
And so they too are going to find some sympathy with the judge below as they listen to the arguments.
And at one point, the judge, I think to Trump's attorney, said, quote, "You're losing all credibility here," when they were making claims, and the judge kept saying, "Show me the evidence." And what, they were just kind of babbling on? They weren't giving him what he wanted?
Last week, Todd Blanche, the lawyer for former President Trump, did get criticized by the judge. And in particular, as you noted, said, you're losing credibility with me. Again, a very serious problem for any lawyer appearing in front of any judge. Today, Blanche seemed to be doing a little better. He read from a script as opposed to simply kind of trying these arguments off the cuff. And he did seem to gain some traction. For example, there was some statement that former President Trump made about Mr. Pecker, saying he was a nice guy. The judge seemed to say, I don't really see that as a potential violation of my order, but we'll see what he says at the end of a couple of days, perhaps, before we know where he is.
And very quickly, to wrap this up, I mean, it seems to those of us on the outside that Trump is getting a heck of a lot more leeway than the average Joe would get.
There's no doubt.
Yes.
There's no doubt. We would be, you and I, clearly incarcerated at this point in time. But there's no easy way for the judge to find himself doing that here for the reasons we talked.
It's a balancing act. Paul Charlton, good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ted.